The angel number that appears right before you make the biggest decision of your life. The part of you that already knows. There is a sentence you have not said out loud. You know exactly which one. It formed in your mind at some point in the last few months, fully assembled, and you pushed it back down before it finished. Maybe it was, I do not want this life anymore. Maybe it was this relationship ended a year ago and we are still pretending. Maybe it was simpler and harder. I am not going to stay. You did not decide that sentence, you discovered it. That distinction is the second layer of what 1111 is tracking. Your body registers decisions before your language permits them. This is not mysticism. It is well documented in how humans process significant change. Recognition happens in the nervous system first, then travels upward into words, sometimes taking months to complete the trip, which means you have been living with a decision that already exists, while telling yourself you are still deciding. The exhaustion makes sense now. You are not tired from weighing options. You are tired from maintaining a negotiation that concluded a while ago. Watch how this shows up physically. Think about the last time you imagined staying exactly as things are for another 5 years. Notice what happened in your chest. Now imagine the other path, the one you have been avoiding naming. Something loosened. Not excitement, not certainty. Something quieter than both. A small relief that you immediately argued with. That reaction is the recognition speaking. And here is where most people get this completely wrong. They assume that because the decision terrifies them, it must be undecided. Fear gets misread as doubt. But those are different mechanisms entirely. Doubt asks which one. Fear asks, how will I survive the consequences of the one I already picked? You are not in doubt. You are in fear of a conclusion you already reached. Read that again slowly if you need to. This is also why external advice has stopped helping. People give you reasons, comparisons, pros and cons. None of it moves you, and you cannot explain why. It is because they are answering a question you closed months ago. You are not looking for information. You are looking for permission to stop pretending. Now bring the number back into this. If the recognition already happened internally, and 1111 began appearing after it, then the pattern is not a delivery system for new information. It is closer to an echo. Something in you registered a truth, and the environment began reflecting it back at the frequency you were capable of noticing. A clock is a very convenient mirror. It is always there. It changes constantly. It offers 1,000 chances a day for a pattern to land. So the sign is confirming something you own. But that raises an obvious problem. If you already know and the decision is already made internally, why does the pattern keep appearing at all? Confirmation should only need to happen once, unless the timing itself is the message. Why the sign comes before and never after. Notice something about your own experience with this number. It did not start after you quit. It did not start after you left, after you spoke, after you signed anything. It started before. And if you look back at previous turning points in your life, the same asymmetry appears. Intense synchronicity in the weeks leading up to a major change, then a strange quiet on the other side. This is the most overlooked feature of angel numbers, and it explains almost everything about their function. Signs concentrate in reversible moments. Awareness only alters outcomes while the outcome is still open. Once the choice is made, once the words leave your mouth, the moment is no longer influenceable. It has become history. Guidance is useless in history. So the pattern appears precisely in the narrow band where your attention still changes something. That band has a beginning and an end. You are inside it right now, which is why the number is loud right now. People find this frustrating, and I understand why. You want to be told what to do. You would take a clear instruction over this ambiguity in a heartbeat. If the clock could just spell out leave or stay, you would sleep tonight. But consider what an instruction would actually cost you. A decision made because you were told is not a threshold crossing. It is compliance. And compliance does not change identity, which is the entire point of what is happening to you. The transformation is not in the outcome. It is in becoming someone who chose. And this is where nearly everyone misreads the silence that follows. When the numbers eventually stop, people panic. They interpret it as abandonment, as having chosen wrong, as guidance withdrawing. Message boards are full of that exact fear. The silence means the function completed. A marker at a doorway has no purpose in the next room. Its job ends at the frame. I will come back to that silence in detail, because it deserves more than a sentence. For now, hold this correction. The number is not late. It is not vague. It is not withholding. It is early on purpose because early is the only time it can matter, which means the intensity you are experiencing right now is positional. It is telling you something about where you are standing, not about how important your decision is in some cosmic ledger. And position can be measured. If the pattern tracks a window, then its frequency should change as you move through that window. It should behave differently when you approach the threshold and differently when you back away from it. That is exactly what it does. And it explains the strangest thing about 1111. Why it seems to get louder the longer you refuse to move. Why it multiplies when you hesitate. At some point, this stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like being followed. 11 minutes past 11. A receipt for 1111. A message time-stamped at exactly that minute. Page 111. The odometer. 4, 5, 6 times in a single week. And a specific thought arrived. Something is trying to get my attention, and I am failing to respond correctly. That thought is closer to accurate than you expect, but not in the way it feels. Frequency does not measure importance. It measures resistance. Here is the mechanism, and it works on 2 levels at once. Psychologically, unresolved decisions raise your baseline alertness. Your attention system is scanning constantly for anything relevant to the open question. The more you suppress the decision consciously, the harder that background process works. You become extraordinarily sensitive to pattern because part of you is searching for a reason to act. Symbolically, the same principle holds. Emphasis increases where agreement is absent. A message repeats when it has not been received. Both readings converge on the same place. The pattern intensifies in the gap between knowing and acting, which means the number is not measuring your situation. It is measuring your hesitation. And this is the detail that reframes the entire experience for most people. You have been treating escalation as urgency, as though the appearances mean hurry. Decide now. Time is running out. That reading produces panic, and panic produces bad decisions or total paralysis. Escalation is not urgency, it is feedback. Think of it as a distance reading. The closer you stand to a threshold you refuse to acknowledge, the louder the marker becomes. Not because you are running out of time, because you are standing directly in front of the door, with your eyes closed. You can test this against your own history. Remember the periods when the numbers went quiet for weeks. What were you doing? Almost certainly one of 2 things. Either you had genuinely moved forward on something or you had fully distracted yourself, buried the question, built enough noise that the recognition could not surface. Now remember when they came flooding back. It was after a moment of honesty, a conversation, a night where you could not sleep, a sudden clarity you tried to forget by morning. The pattern followed your awareness, not your calendar. So the intensity right now is telling you something specific and slightly uncomfortable. You are very close, and you are holding still. That combination generates the exact sensation you have been describing to yourself as being haunted by a number. Nothing is haunting you. You are standing at a doorway with your hand on the frame, refusing to look at it, and the frame keeps getting brighter. But feedback can be misread. And there is one misreading so common that it derails most people entirely. It is the reason some people see 1111 for 2 years and never move. Or it's the mistake almost everyone makes with 1111. They wait for a clearer sign. That is it. That is the trap, and it is almost invisible while you are inside it. It sounds reasonable. The decision is enormous. The consequences are real. So you decide, quite sensibly, that before acting you would like more confirmation. Something undeniable. Something that removes the risk of being wrong. So you watch. You count appearances. You screenshot the clock. You look up meanings, compare interpretations, ask which one applies to your exact situation. And months pass. Notice what has happened structurally. You converted the sign into a condition. Now the decision is no longer yours. It belongs to a future signal that has to arrive with impossible precision before you are allowed to move. That signal will never come, not because guidance is cruel, but because the required clarity does not exist in the format you are demanding. No sign can carry the information you want, which is proof of the outcome. Certainty about consequences is not available to anyone, ever, in any decision that matters. And here is the specific way this goes wrong for people, the part nobody warns about. Waiting starts to feel spiritual. You tell yourself you are being patient, trusting the timing, allowing things to unfold. The language of surrender gets borrowed to describe what is actually avoidance, and because the language sounds wise, it becomes very difficult to question. I want to be careful here because real patience exists. Some things genuinely should not be forced. The difference is testable. Real patience feels settled. There is no low hum of dread underneath it. You are not rehearsing conversations at 2 a.m. You are not exhausted. Avoidance dressed as patience feels exactly like what you have been living in. Tired, suspended, slightly sick of yourself. You already know which one you are in. There is a second version of this mistake, quieter and more painful. Some people read 11:11 as approval, as a stamp confirming that the choice they want to make is correct, sanctioned, guaranteed. So they act, and then when the first difficulty arrives, they collapse. They were promised this was right. Difficulty must mean they misread everything. Both versions share one root error. They treat the number as an authority outside themselves. One waits for its command, the other seeks its endorsement. Neither takes ownership of the crossing, and ownership is the entire mechanism by which a threshold transforms anyone. So if 11:11 is not an instruction, and it is not an endorsement, we need to be precise about what it actually asks of you. Because it does ask something. That much you have felt correctly. It is just a much smaller request than you have been imagining, and a much stranger one. It isn't permission, it's attention. Here is what the number is asking for. Be present at the threshold. That is the whole request. Not act immediately, not choose correctly, not know the outcome. Notice where you are standing while you are standing there. This sounds almost insultingly simple until you consider how humans normally handle major decisions. We make them in states of near total absence. We decide at 3 a.m. inside a spiral of dread. We decide reactively after an argument. We decide by delaying so long the decision gets made by circumstances, then call it fate. Most life-altering choices are made while completely checked out. The request is that this one not be. And attention has a mechanical effect that has nothing to do with anything mystical. When you are present, you can distinguish your own motives. You can tell whether you are moving toward something or fleeing something. You notice which parts of your reasoning belong to you, and which were installed by people whose approval you stopped needing years ago. Absent, none of that is visible. You just feel pressure and react. So the number does something quite specific. It interrupts. Every appearance is a small break in autopilot. For 2 or 3 seconds you come back into the room. You remember there is an open question in your life. Then the day resumes. Multiply that by 6 times a week for 2 months and something accumulates. You become unable to fully forget the decision. The anesthesia stops working. That is not comfort. It is not meant to be. And this is the part almost nobody understands about attention as a spiritual practice. Attention is not passive observation. It is participation. The moment you genuinely look at your situation without flinching, the situation changes. Not externally. Nothing in your circumstances shifts because you looked, but your relationship to the choice reorganizes completely because you can no longer pretend not to know, which is precisely why looking is so hard. You have been avoiding the clock, in a sense. Not the numbers themselves, but what they keep interrupting. Every time 11:11 appears, you are pulled back to a question you have arranged your entire week to avoid. Try something different when it next appears. Do not look up a meaning. Do not screenshot it. Do not ask what it wants. Just stay there for 10 seconds and let the decision fully surface. All of it, including the part you keep editing out. Most people cannot manage 10 seconds on the first attempt. And when you do manage it, something surfaces that you were not expecting. The choice you thought you were facing is not the real one. Underneath the job, the city, the relationship, the conversation you have not had, there is a second decision. Older, much more personal, and that is the one the number has been marking all along. The decision underneath. The decision. Name the choice on the surface. Stay or leave. Speak or keep quiet. Accept the offer or refuse it. Move or remain. Now notice that people facing the identical surface choice make opposite decisions and both end up fine, while others make the same decision and end up destroyed. The outcome clearly does not live in the option. It lives underneath. Every significant decision sits on top of a much older one, and the older one always has the same shape. Do I get to want what I want? That is it. Every version of it. Am I allowed to take up space? Does my preference count as a reason? Is my discomfort real evidence or just weakness? Do I need someone to validate this before it becomes legitimate? The surface decision is a proxy. It is where that ancient question finally becomes concrete enough to answer, which is why this feels so disproportionate. You have told yourself that you are overreacting. It is only a job. People change cities constantly. Relationships end every day. Objectively, none of this is unprecedented. And yet it feels enormous, almost existential, and slightly embarrassing to feel that way. It feels enormous because it is not about the job. It is about whether you are someone who acts on what you know. Here is the specific thing that changes everything about how you read your own hesitation. You are not afraid of the consequences. You are afraid of the precedent. If you leave this, you have established that you will leave things when they stop being true. That is a much larger commitment than any single decision. It means you cannot go back to the version of yourself who endures situations indefinitely while calling it loyalty, or patience, or realism. The self-image is what is at stake. That is why it feels like standing at an edge. And this reframes the pattern precisely. 1111 clusters around identity thresholds, not logistical ones. Nobody reports intense synchronicity around choosing a phone plan. The number appears when the real question underneath has become answerable, which explains the timing again from a different angle. The threshold opened when you became capable of answering the older question, not before. You have probably faced a version of this same choice years ago and did nothing. And nothing dramatic happened, because you were not yet able to answer. You are able now. That capability is what opened the door. But two very different engines can drive the same action. And this is where people wreck themselves. You can leave from alignment or you can leave from panic. From the outside, the two look identical. The paperwork is the same. Internally, they produce completely different lives. So we need a way to tell them apart. And logic cannot do it because fear is exceptionally good at producing reasonable arguments. Fear or alignment. How to tell them apart. You do not trust your own motives right now. That is the honest position. Part of you suspects this is just escape, that you are romanticizing a decision to avoid difficulty, and in 6 months you will regret it and understand you were simply running. That suspicion is healthy. It is also answerable. Fear and alignment have distinct physical signatures, and the body reports them accurately before the mind has finished constructing arguments. Start with fear. Fear-driven decisions rush. There is a compression to them, a sense that you must act immediately or lose the chance. Fear narrows. It makes the option feel like the only exit rather than one path among several. It generates urgency without clarity. And fear-driven choices tend to be about the other person or the situation more than about you. The reasoning is full of them. What they did. What they will not change. How unfair it has been. Notice something about that. Fear needs a villain to justify movement. Now alignment. Alignment is quiet, almost disappointingly quiet. There is no rush inside it. When you imagine the aligned choice, you do not feel excitement so much as a kind of settling. The way a room goes quiet when a noise you had stopped noticing finally stops. It is often accompanied by sadness. This confuses people enormously. Alignment does not feel triumphant. It feels like agreement. And here is the detail that most people miss entirely, the one that resolves the confusion faster than anything else. Aligned decisions do not require you to be angry to hold them. Test this. Imagine the choice on a calm morning. Nothing has gone wrong. Nobody has upset you. You are rested. The coffee is good. The day is ordinary. Does the decision still hold? If it dissolves when you are calm, it was reactive. It needed the fuel of a bad week to exist. If it is still standing there quietly on a good day when nothing is provoking you, when you have no grievance to point at, then it is not escape. It is recognition. Most people, doing this honestly, discover something they did not expect. The decision is calmest on the calm days. It gets louder and more panicked only when they are exhausted, which is exactly when they distrust it most. You have been evaluating your own clarity during your worst hours and using that as evidence against it. Run the test on a good morning instead. And notice the body while you do. Contraction in the chest, shallow breathing, a rehearsing mind. That is fear. A slower breath, heaviness in the shoulders, an odd calm underneath the sadness. That is alignment. So now you can identify what is actually driving you. Which leaves one question, and it is the one people ask last. If it is aligned, and I still have not moved, then why does everything in my life feel completely stuck? Why nothing moves until you answer? You have noticed the repetition, not the numbers, the situations, the same kind of conversation with a different person, the same conflict at a new job, the same dynamic appearing in a relationship you were certain would be different. It feels like bad luck or a personal defect. It is neither. Unanswered decisions get represented. Life has a way of returning to open questions, dressed differently each time. The circumstances change, the structure does not. And the reason is not punitive. Certain doors do not open until a specific question is answered, because the answer is the key, which produces a sensation you know intimately, effort without traction. You are working hard, being responsible, doing what should produce movement, and everything stays exactly where it is. Stagnation is often the shape of a postponed yes. And this is where I want to correct something because it is the most damaging misreading in this entire territory. Being stuck is not a punishment for indecision. It is a consequence of division. Half of you has decided. The other half is committed to a life that decision would end. So your energy splits, and split energy cannot build anything. You cannot commit fully to the current path because part of you has already left. You cannot commit to the new path because you have not admitted it exists. So you maintain both and both stay incomplete. That is the stuckness. It is not cosmic. It is structural, and it costs an enormous amount to sustain. Think about how much of your attention goes to managing the unmade decision, the rehearsing, the imagining, the justifying to yourself, daily, why now is not the right moment. That is not free. It is drawn from the same reserve you need for everything else, which explains why you feel tired in a way sleep does not fix. There is also a timing element people do not expect. Answering a question is not the same as executing an outcome. You can answer honestly and still act slowly, carefully with a plan. The paralysis does not break at the moment of action. It breaks at the moment of admission. The instant you say the sentence to yourself without arguing, energy consolidates. Even if nothing external changes for months, people report this consistently. The relief comes before the departure, because the exhaustion was never the situation, it was the division. So the crossing is not primarily an act, it is an agreement. But agreements have costs, and this is the real reason you have been standing at this door for so long. It is not fear of the unknown. You have handled unknowns before. It is that crossing requires leaving someone behind, and that someone is you. The price of the threshold. Every threshold has a toll, not the obvious costs, not the money, the logistics, the difficult conversations, the disruption. Those are real, but they are not what stops people. The toll is a version of yourself, Cross this door, and the person you have been for the last several years does not come with you. The one who stayed, who managed, who was reliable in a situation that required constant management to survive. That person had genuine virtues, endurance, loyalty, the ability to make an impossible arrangement function. Those virtues become unnecessary on the other side, and nobody warns you how much that hurts. You are not just grieving the situation, you are grieving your own competence at enduring it. This is why people cry at strange moments during major transitions. Not about the loss itself, but about the years spent being excellent at something that turned out not to be worth doing. Let me say the harder version of this clearly. Part of your hesitation is that leaving means admitting the waiting was not necessary. That the last 2 years, or 5, or 10, could have been different. That the patience you were so proud of may have been avoidance wearing better clothes. That admission is brutal, and most people would rather stay another year than face it. So they stay. And this is the detail that changes everything about how to handle this moment. The grief is not a warning. It is not evidence you are making a mistake. People consistently misread mourning as doubt. They feel deep sadness about a decision they know is right, and conclude the sadness must be a signal to reconsider. So they stop, wait, and the whole cycle restarts. Grief and error are different signals entirely. Error feels like tightness and dread about what is coming. Grief feels like sorrow about what is ending. One points forward, one points backward. You can be certain and devastated simultaneously. Most people crossing a real threshold are exactly that, and there is something worth doing before you cross which almost nobody does. Thank the version of yourself who stayed. Not ironically, genuinely. That person kept you alive through a period that required it. They were not weak. They were doing the only available thing with the capacity they had at the time. The reason this matters practically is that unmourned selves follow you. People who cross while despising who they used to be tend to rebuild the same structure on the other side, because contempt for your past is not a foundation. Handled honestly, the grief completes. And when it completes, something specific happens in the days immediately after crossing. It is not what most people expect, and it is where a great many people panic and reverse course. What happens in the 72 hours after you decide? You expect relief. Clean, obvious, unmistakable relief. The kind that confirms you chose correctly and lets you finally breathe. That is not usually what arrives. What arrives first is turbulence. The first days after a real decision are frequently uncomfortable, sometimes intensely so. Sleep gets strange. Doubt surges. Practical problems appear immediately, often several at once, with almost mocking timing. And a thought forms. I made a mistake. The moment I chose, everything got worse. Here is what is actually happening. You removed a load-bearing wall. Everything attached to that wall now has to redistribute, and redistribution is not quiet. Your routines were built around the old arrangement. Your relationships were calibrated to the version of you who stayed. Your identity had a stable story. All of that has to reorganize, and while it does, the friction is constant. Friction is not error, it is structure moving. The confusion is understandable, because in the ordinary flow of life, discomfort usually does signal a wrong turn. But at a threshold, that heuristic inverts. Smoothness would mean nothing significant changed, and there is a specific phenomenon in this window that almost nobody is prepared for. The old path becomes suddenly attractive. Whatever you left will offer its best version of itself in the days after you leave. The job improves. The person becomes thoughtful. The situation demonstrates exactly the qualities you had been asking for. This is where an enormous number of people reverse. It is not a sign you misjudged. Systems resist losing a component. The improvement is real, and it is temporary, and it appears precisely when your resolve is thinnest and your sleep is worst. Which is why the decision must be made before this window, on a calm morning, with a clear head. You are not deciding during turbulence. You are executing a decision made earlier by a version of you who was rested and honest. Write it down before you cross. The actual reasoning, in your own words, on a good day. You will need it on day 3, when you no longer believe yourself. Something else happens in this period, and it is subtle. The pattern quiets. Not always immediately, but within days or weeks. 1111 stops arriving with the same insistence. And after months of it being everywhere, the absence is loud. For a lot of people, this is more distressing than the turbulence. They interpret silence as being left alone at the worst possible moment. That interpretation is wrong, and understanding why is the last layer of this entire pattern. When 1111 suddenly stops appearing. One day you notice you have not seen it in weeks, and the reaction is immediate and physical. A small drop in the stomach. Did I lose it? Was I not paying enough attention? Did I choose wrong and get abandoned for it? Search for this and you will find thousands of people describing exactly that fear. Here is the answer, plainly. A marker at a doorway serves no function in the next room. The pattern was positional from the beginning. It marked a threshold while you stood in front of one. Once you crossed, the position no longer exists, so neither does the marker. Nothing was withdrawn. A function completed. And notice the implication, because it is the most reassuring thing in this video. The silence is confirmation. If the number appeared to mark an open decision, its absence indicates the decision is no longer open. You answered. The measurement ended because there is nothing left to measure. But there is a second reason the pattern quiets, and this one matters more. External signs are training wheels for internal recognition. You needed the interruptions because you were not yet able to hold the awareness on your own. The number did that work for you 6 times a week, pulling you back to a question you kept dropping. After you cross, you do not need to be interrupted. You have demonstrated you can hear the recognition and act on it. The capacity moved inside. This is the actual progression, and almost no one describes it. Guidance begins loud and external because your attention is scattered. It becomes quiet and internal as your attention becomes reliable. Silence is not the removal of guidance. It is guidance no longer needing an intermediary, which means something worth sitting with. If 1111 is loud in your life right now, it indicates you are at a threshold and have not yet crossed. If it has gone quiet after a period of intensity, and you have recently made a real decision, you are already through, and the steadiness you feel is not emptiness. It is yours. There is one caveat, and it is worth stating so nobody misuses this. Sometimes patterns pause because you have gone numb, not because you resolved anything. The difference is easy to identify. Resolution is accompanied by consolidated energy and a sense of direction, even if the road is hard. Numbness is accompanied by flatness and a vague sense of having given up quietly. You know which one you are in. You always did. So the pattern ends. The threshold closes behind you. And what remains is the thing all of this was arranged around from the start. Not the sign, not the decision, not the outcome. You. The version of you, waiting on the other side. There is a common way of describing this that I think is wrong. People say that after a major decision you become a new person, that you transform into someone unrecognizable, upgraded, finally aligned. That framing sounds inspiring and creates unnecessary pressure. You do not become someone new. You stop negotiating with someone old. That is what actually changes. The internal argument that has been running in the background for years finally ends. Not because you won it, but because you stopped participating in it. And what remains is startlingly familiar. People describe it consistently after real thresholds. Not I feel like a different person, but I feel like myself again. Like something I recognize from a long time ago came back into the room, which reframes the entire idea of transformation. Transformation is largely subtraction. You are not adding qualities. You are removing the constant self-betrayal that was consuming most of your available energy. And when that stops, what is underneath was never damaged. It was occupied. This is why the aftermath feels quieter than people expect. They anticipate a dramatic new life. What they get is an ordinary Tuesday where the low hum of dread is simply not there. And the absence of that hum is more significant than any external achievement. Here's the part that most people never realize about their own hesitation. You were not afraid of who you would become. You were afraid you already knew who that was, and that meeting them would make the delay unbearable to look at. That fear resolves faster than you expect, because the version of you on the other side does not resent the waiting. That is a projection from the current version, the one still exhausted and still defending itself. Once you cross, the delay stops feeling like wasted time and starts feeling like the length it took to become capable. You could not have crossed earlier. You were not able to answer the underlying question yet. The years were not lost. They were the duration of becoming answerable. And notice where all of this returns, not to a sign, not to a number on a clock, to a person standing in a kitchen holding something heavy, who already knew and needed a doorway marked clearly enough that they could not keep walking past it. That is all 1111 ever did. It made the door visible. Everything now comes full circle, back to the moment this started and to what is actually being asked of you tonight. Stand at the door. It will be 1111 again. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow while you are doing something unremarkable. And now you know what you are looking at, not a message, not a command, not a promise that everything will work out. A doorway, marked clearly, while it is still open. Let me give you everything compressed into its simplest form. The number appears before the decision because before is the only time awareness changes anything. It intensifies when you hesitate because emphasis increases where agreement is absent. It stops when you cross because a marker has no purpose past the frame. The recognition was never in the clock. It was in you months before the pattern started, and the pattern only began reflecting what you had already quietly admitted. You are not waiting for clarity. You have clarity. You have had it for a while. You are waiting for permission, and there is nobody left who can issue it. That is not a harsh conclusion. It is the most respectful thing this pattern has been trying to tell you. You are the authority in your own life. You always were. The number has been standing beside a door, pointing for months, waiting for you to stop asking it what to do. So here is what I would offer you instead of another sign. Stop counting appearances. Stop screenshotting the clock. Stop searching for the interpretation that finally makes it safe. Pick a calm morning, not a night, not a bad week. Sit somewhere quiet and let the sentence you have been editing come all the way up, finished, unargued with. Then notice whether it is still standing when nothing is provoking you. If it is, you have your answer. And you had it before you clicked on this video. You do not need to act today. Agreement comes first. Action follows at whatever pace is actually wise. But the agreement has to be made, because the division is what has been exhausting you, not the situation. And one more thing. The sadness you feel about this is not a warning. It is the appropriate weight of something that mattered ending. You are allowed to be certain and heartbroken at the same time. Almost everyone at a real threshold is. Whatever you choose it awake. That was the whole request. Not correctly. Awake. The door is open. It has been open for a while, and it will not stay open indefinitely. Not because anything is punishing you, but because doors close when the moment they belong to passes. You have seen the number enough times to know where you are standing. Now stand there on purpose.